To better understand our world, ourselves, and our future, this program was made possible by the people of Chevron. Chevron, giving thought to television.
Additional funding was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
This is PBS.
Tonight at 10, You Gotta Have Art salutes Vincent van Gogh. Coming next, Bill Moyers talks with the late John Henry Faulk, who passed away this past April, best known for his victory over the Blacklisters almost 30 years ago. You'll learn about an entire era of media in the hour coming next. Exciting things are happening here this summer.
And we want you to join us inside 13.
Meet the people who make it happen. Be one of the people who make it possible.
August 18th through the 26th. See special programs, enjoy sneak previews.
And join us as a member when we take you inside 13. Friday night, look for Bill Moyers again, this time in a conversation about the economy with guest Louis Kelso.
The minute your income exceeds what you will spend on consumption for yourself and your dependents, you're no good to the economy anymore. You only use the excess for one purpose, and it's a bad purpose, namely accumulating more excess.
Some thoughts on capitalism with Louis Kelso, next time on A World of Ideas.
Friday night at 10. Earlier this week, you may have been with us for the first part of our look at Edward R. Murrow on American Masters. We'll present part 2 of his film biography on Monday night at 9. But now you're about to meet another CBS legend, John Henry Faulk. As today's New York Times said, Bill Moyers and Studs Terkel come not to bury Faulk, but to praise him. You'll hear Faulk describe his 1956 stand against anti-communist blacklisters. Studs Terkel says John Henry Faulk reminds him of Mark Twain. See what you think.
Funding for this program was provided by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, a catalyst for change. J.R. Parton, the Bernard and Audrey Rappaport Foundation, the Rockwell Fund, Incorporated, the Samuel Rubin Foundation, and others.
The genius of the government that we've established is the four great rights of the people: conscience, speech, press, and right to assemble are included in it because this great notion will guarantee in perpetuity the right and protect the right of people to voice those opinions we loathe and despise. Protect them with the same force it does those that we cherish and live by.
Does this mean I'm a communist, Senator? That's awfully funny, isn't it, Mr. Secretary? That's terribly funny.
This was the 1950s, the time of the Cold War, loyalty oaths, Joe McCarthy. Blacklisting ruled the airways.
If you wanted to discredit an otherwise legitimate political opponent
and didn't want to argue over what the real issues were,
you call him a communist.
Yes, they found a perfect way to shut off the political dialogue in our society. See?
Now let's
and shut up dissent. Of course I believe in the right to dissent, Congressman. The right to dissent's a sacred American right. I'll knock a man's teeth down his throat, interfere with my right to dissent.
When this was over, Louis Nizer wrote in his own book, A View, one lone man with virtually no resources dragged the defendants into court and, although outrageously outnumbered, withstood starvation and disgrace and summoned enough strength to battle them into submission.
Well, how do you do? Thank you for coming. I'm just glad to see you.
John Henry Falk, a key figure in a landmark legal decision, an articulate spokesman for constitutional rights, and a very funny guy.
Calvin Banks, he invented a do-it-yourself baptismal kit. It was for shut-ins. And if you sent your money ahead of time, prepaid, Cal would send you an autographed picture of Jesus Christ that glowed in the dark. And his eyes would follow you anywhere you went in the room.
John Henry Falk was one lone man in his fight against blacklisting and one lone man on stage. But he was never a lonely man. A guy once said, Johnny collects more friends in one afternoon than a watermelon has seeds. I'm Studs Terkel, and I'm one of those friends for more than 40 years. On this rainy day, I am here on the south side of Austin, Texas, where John Henry Falk grew up. This was the family home. It's now a restaurant, elegant and famous, established by John Henry's sister, Mary Falk Cook. There are peacocks strutting in the yard where chickens used to be. But in a sense, this rambling old house hasn't changed that much. It was always warm and welcoming, full of kids and relatives and visitors, the sort of people who, years later, would become the inspiration for Johnny's characters.
You know, he married somebody I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about the Magnus family. And he married Eloise Magnus. And he took his honeymoon down in Mexico. By himself. I don't mind telling you, it hurt her feelings.
John Henry is a humorist, an observer of the human comedy. But he has a point of view, and you spot that throughout his work. And we're often laughing, not so much at that person, but on recognizing that frailty in ourselves as well. And although Johnny's characters all seem to have their roots in the South, Johnny himself traveled the world. In the 1940s, John Henry packed up and moved to New York. In the next few years, he and his wife would have 3 children, and John Henry would build a career. And by the early 50s, he had a radio show on WCBS, the flagship station for the Columbia Broadcasting System. It was a 1-hour show each afternoon, 5 days a week. John Henry would spin a few yarns, reminisce about his childhood in Texas, and comment on the news of the day, the frailties of this crazy human species, and the foibles of the world. John Henry's New York country humor was a big success. Sophisticated city types may not have been quite certain whether they were laughing with him or at him, but they'd had the same trouble with Mark Twain. And for Johnny, as for Twain, the trick was to use humor to convey an idea or plant a seed. He had jokes to tell, sure, but he also had ideas to share. And this was the 1950s, the time of the Cold War, loyalty oaths, Joe McCarthy. And suddenly, this soft-spoken maverick Texan, sitting on top of the world, found himself in big trouble on the front lines and on the front page. To Johnny, it was a matter of the U.S. Constitution, the passion of his life. He began spreading the gospel of the Constitution when he was a student at the University of Texas. Some 40 years later, he talked to Bill Moyers about that.
I was at William and Mary College in Williamsburg last week, about 2 weeks after you were there. And I was intrigued by all the publicity that still was following in your wake.
Wasn't that nice?
Yeah, you know, when you went there, they didn't know who John Henry Falk was. These undergraduates hadn't been born when you were suffering your ordeal back in the 50s. And yet, according to the press and my sources there, when you finished speaking, they gave you a standing ovation.
Yeah, honey, you know, Mama had aimed me toward the Methodist ministry, but by the time I got born, she realized she shot a blank. I still have an evangelical streak in me, apparently, because I used it there at that thing. I got to talk about the First Amendment, got to talk about the McCarthy period, and the trivialization of our most meaningful national experience, namely the election of our federal officers, the president and on down. And I got so carried away, I started saving souls, Bill. I really did. I got kind of state of joy at it.
Did they know what you were talking about, these young kids at this very traditional college?
See, I do a great many college speeches, and that's the reason I do, is that I'm determined that they shall remember that they shall know what the McCarthy period was all about. And it's not taught in our schools. The meaning of McCarthyism has never been taught. See, it's supposed to be an anti-communist movement. It had nothing to do with communism, anti or otherwise.
What was it?
At that time, the use of communism, see, was a way of bolstering up, number one, the Cold War that was opening up. And number two, and most important of all, and this is terribly important to understand the McCarthy period, it was a way of shutting off the dialogue. The life's blood of this country is an open and robust dialogue, a rational political dialogue where everybody's free to say what they believe, why they believe it, and to persuade their neighbor to their point of view. That is the way we move forward in our society.
Well, what happened in the 50s was that the way to silence your opponent was to call him a communist.
But we were told that there was an international communist conspiracy afoot, and it had its bony hand right on the White House door. And Roosevelt and that crowd of cronies that he had there were nothing but a bunch of old communistic things. I had an aunt that said, Johnny, they just scare me to death when I think they're right there in Washington, D.C., fixing to take over this government any day. And I said, hey, Edith, the people of this country are not going to put communists in charge of anything. You just don't know. You just don't know, Johnny.
What's that story you tell about when you were 12 years old, your mother sent you out to the hen house to look for the chicken snake that was harassing the hens?
Well, I use that usually to illustrate something. Boots Cooper and I were law and order men. I was a Texas Ranger, and he was a United States Marshal.
When you were playing as kids?
We were both 12 years old, and we rode the frontier between Mama's back door and her hen house and the cow barn out there. We lived out in South Austin, Texas. And Mama told us there was a chicken snake in one of the hen's nests out there. Would we mighty lawmen go out and execute it? We both of us barefooted in overalls, and we laid aside our stick horses, got a hoe, and went in, and the hens were in a state of acute agitation, and they had the crane in their necks, and we had to stand on tiptoe to look in the top tier of nests, and about the third top nest we looked in, a chicken snake looked out of. And I don't know, Bill, whether you've ever viewed a chicken snake from the distance of 6 inches from the end of your nose.
Not that close.
But
I've kept it
the damn things look like a boa constrictor from that distance, although it's about the size of your finger. And Boots and I, all of our frontier courage drained out our heels. Actually, it trickled down our overall legs. and Boots and I made a new door through the hen house wall. And Mama came out and said, well, you've lulled me into a sense of false security. I thought I was safe from all hurt and harm, and here you've let a chicken snake run you out of the hen house. And a little chicken snake at that. Don't you know chicken snakes are harmless? They can't hurt you. Boots said, yes, sir, Miss Falk, I know that. And he was rubbing his forehead and his behind at the same time. Said, but they can scare you so bad it'll cause you to hurt yourself.
And that's what happened.
This is what happened to us during that period, Bill.
We became so frightened of the...
At our own freedoms.
Yeah.
And see, the men who erected the protections for the individual Americans back there 200 years ago believed that we would be capable of governing ourselves. And they knew in order for us to be, they would have to make it an absolute mandate. Anything of lesser force wouldn't survive the kind of crisis that they knew would come. They were men of great wisdom and vision, literate men.
But they didn't put a Bill of Rights in the Constitution until the people demanded it.
You know, that is lost on so many scholars and almost as many judges. And I don't know, I'm not lambasting the federal judiciary, but they at least should be acquainted as how we came to have a Bill of Rights.
Have you ever thought of how beautifully constructed, how wonderfully crafted that First Amendment is?
Ooh, yes, I've thought of that a great deal.
You know what it says? Literally?
Yes.
Congress shall make no law
respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging freedom of speech, or the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and petition their government for the redress of grievances.
Why are you so passionate about the First Amendment in particular? I mean, you did bring those students at William and Mary to their feet talking about this.
Because it puts every American citizen, whatever color, whatever walk of life, on precisely the same footing, just as your right to vote puts you on the same footing with the heads of the party, with the richest men, all the Rockefeller boys.
But the fact of the matter is, the First Amendment didn't protect you in the 1950s.
Oh, yes, it did.
You lost your job.
That's right.
You lost your career.
What the hell is a job? Huh? There's a lot of other jobs.
What the hell is a job? John Henry may say that now, but where the hell is a job is what he was saying back in the 50s. And nowhere is the answer he kept getting. John Henry built his reputation as a folklorist, as a TV and radio humorist. But the big event of his life was a drama. A drama with all the conflict one could ask for. It began with a group of right-wing vigilantes who called themselves Aware Incorporated. They set themselves up as judge and jury to decide who was fit to work in the entertainment business. One of Aware's most vocal members was Vincent Hartnett, a professional witch hunter who made a fairly good buck out of it by publishing a rag called Red Channels, which listed performers, writers, and directors that Hartnett considered subversive. Another was Lawrence A. Johnson, a grocery chain owner in Syracuse, New York, who threatened to boycott the products of any sponsor who employed those he disapproved of.
They completely dominated the radio and television industry. They published periodically in this climate of fear. Boots Cooper's truth of his statement was being proven every day up in the radio and television industry in Hollywood and New York. This climate of fear, they published a list of names of persons, artists, producers, directors, writers, and performers who had in the past done something that Aware decided indicated less than loyalty to the United States of America.
But how did Aware get to you?
All right. I belonged to a union called AFTRA. And I had in the union, I got up a slate of officers because the leadership of our union was all pro-Aware. And the membership of the union had been so decimated by Aware's attacks that they, because Aware did this for money. They made money out of this, you see. This fellow Hartnett made a lot of money.
How do you make money?
By charging the networks and the advertising agencies to clear names. Your name had to be cleared by Aware. That's how powerful it had become.
So what did you do? You organized?
I organized this group of members. We'd sit around bellyache about the injustice of blacklisting. But if you even criticized the House Committee or the FBI, you were candidate for blacklisting. This man is critical of the FBI. Really, that's the way they'd list him. And so I raised this Gideon's army of guys, all of whom expressed their indignation to me, and I said, well, let's run against it. We ran and swept into office.
Your slate won the elections of the local union.
And the national union. The national union was controlled by the right wing, these McCarthyites, rigid McCarthyites. And our local had been a shameful bunch.
So what happened
watching their own fellow members get blacklisted, destroyed them. See, the function of a union isn't to help Aware blacklist people, but to protect performers' jobs. That's the only reason a guy pays union fees, you see. Or any union man supposedly pays union wages, union Union's dues is to get the protection of the Union for his job and his working conditions. I got this bunch together. We ran in the fall of 1955 and swept into office. And Charlie Collingwood, bless his old sweetheart, became president. And I became a vice president. Old Orson Bean became a vice president. And we were going to save the world. And, of course, it made headlines then, Bill. This is back in 1956. Literally, anti-blacklist slate wins. The following week, the House Un-American Activities Committee, true to its form, published a statement, communists taking over the entertainment industry under the guise of anti-blacklist. And it scared the jumping daylights out of these people, some of the people that had run with me. We'd run a pretty big slate and had pretty big support. God called me up and said, don't mention that I supported the slate. Please don't. You know, this was the level of fear, is what it had done to the people. And then, aware, after the House committee roughed us up, old Ed Murrah and Charlie Collingwood and I sat down to figure out what kind of response to make. We got up in Murrah's office, and I said, let me respond to them. They said, no, you get too mad. We want a measured response. They'll take their hides off, but, and Charlie's more eloquent, which was absolute fact. So Charlie wrote a response, and it was a smashing one, to the House committee. You tend to your own business. We tend to union business. And not only this is this false, but it's improper that you would be meddling in our affairs. So Aware then put out a bulletin on us and says, this middle-of-the-road slate. See, we pledged that we weren't communist or anything, and wasn't going to eat any children or anything ugly, and go to church regular if they just elect our slate. This middle-of-the-road slate alleges that it's not communist. But let's look at, perhaps it isn't a communist movement, but let's look at some of the leadership. For instance, John Henry Falk, who organized it. And then they went to town on me. They alleged 5 different things that I'd done, 2 of which were true. I'd done them. That I'd appeared at a dinner at the Astor Hotel in 1946 with a known communist and never repudiated that appearance. It was the year 1 birthday party for the United Nations Security Council. That was when Trygve Lie was Secretary General of the United Nations Security Council. And it was under the sponsorship of that well-known left-wing outfit called the American Bar Association and about 25 other similarly left-wing organizations. And
that was the event, they said?
That I had attended, and that there was a known communist there. And they didn't mention that he was a member of the Security Council named Andrei Gromyko, who was just as un-American as you can get.
The Soviet foreign minister.
Yes, and it was being broadcast full network over CBS. This is the irony of it. This is 10 years later they make this charge that I was there, and so they were accurate. I was there.
What was the other event you said that was true?
Yes.
You were at the UN birthday party, and there was a known communist there, Gromyko from the Soviet Union. But what was the other one? You had performed for Henry Wallace?
Or I think I'd supported Henry Wallace, or I'd entertained for Henry Wallace, or something like that. You see, that if both of these things had been absolute factual, what both of them were, as a matter of fact, it didn't mean a darn thing. It didn't mean, had no meaning, and neither one were illegal, and the other things were totally false. Had not even a scintilla of truth in them. But Aware had gotten so reckless by this time that they didn't care whether it's true or false. Nobody ever called their hand on it.
But you had, just to clear the record, you had no communist sympathies. You belonged to no organization.
No, and you see, this is the whole thing, Bill. They knew that. But at any rate, CBS called me in and said, Aware's gotten hold of your sponsors, and they're canceling out on you. And you've got to correct this. And said, look, you go home and write an affidavit saying that you were misled, thanking Aware for calling this to your attention, that you were violently anti-communist. You can't stand them. And you would stomp one if you could see it. And that you a loyal, fine American, that you served in the American Red Cross overseas in the Middle East, and that you served in the United States Army, and that you're so patriotic it just gives you a headache when you get to reflecting on it. And you make it very patriotic, but apologize and say that you did get into a couple of those that are true. See, this is the way you'd get off of Aware's list. if you apologize to Aware, volunteered to go down to the House Un-American Activities Committee and spill your insides on all your friends and how you got involved in this, told the FBI all of this stuff, they were all garbage collection, I call them. Aware and FBI were. They collected garbage and dumped it on your head when they got a chance.
So you're sitting there in your apartment in New York.
All this going through my mind.
You got CBS's offer that if you'll just say mea culpa, I didn't mean it.
That's right.
I was just an innocent.
Apologize for those things that had offended Aware.
You'd be okay, and Aware would take you off the list.
Oh, and I also had to say in this, and say it in a polite way, Johnny. Now, don't say it in a satiric way because it won't work. Say that you appreciate Aware's concern and appreciate many of the good things they've done and the patriotic work they've done in cleansing our industry of communism. Well, I got there and got thinking, as I said, I said, Lord have mercy, it's like wading through my own vomit. I couldn't do something like that. Good God, I couldn't do that.
When you told CBS, who very much wanted you to cooperate because it meant
yes,
the show.
I was making money for them.
Making money for them. When you told them you couldn't do it, what happened?
Oh, I didn't do that. Oh. I wrote an affidavit. I didn't write it by myself. Now, let me make that clear. Palmer Weber and Clark Foreman, two beloved friends, came over to my house. And I said, I've decided I'm not going to write that affidavit they want. I want to make this a good, strong one. I'm John Henry Falk. I was raised a Methodist boy in South Austin, and both my parents were Methodists, and I believe in the Constitution of the United States, and I believe that it means what it says whenever man is entitled to be confronted by his accusers and to bring witnesses in his own defense and to cross-examine his accusers. I'm quite sure CBS believes the same thing. I have been attacked by people that I don't even know, that are a poison and a poisonous influence in the broadcast industry, that are for money, destroy the careers of men and women in this industry, and I won't deign to answer anything they say. I'll go down to the courthouse and answer it. We're going to have it. I carry them down to county court, as old man Telepap used to say. I'll take you down there at that county courthouse. By God, we'll have this out.
And that's what Johnny did. He was no communist, and by God, he would have his day in court. John Henry Falk turned the tables on the blacklisters and sued them for libel. Initially, Aware would choose Roy Cohn, notorious as special assistant to Senator Joe McCarthy, to provide its defense. Johnny would turn to one of the nation's top trial lawyers.
Louis Nizer, Mr. Louis Nizer, one of the, he's not so tall, but when he gets in the courtroom, he's about 25 foot tall, Bill. And he felt the same indignation. He knew about their blacklisting out in Hollywood, see, because he was an attorney for the film companies. And we sat down and went over the whole thing. And it was kind of like sitting in a Supreme Court justice's office, because here was Mr. Nizer, this multi-million-dollar lawyer that I knew I couldn't afford unless I could set him on the, and Ed Murrah thought that we could sell him, that he would get indignant over this as Ed was and as I was, and that this would be a golden opportunity. And he took it on. And it was he understood it would be a very big suit. And he said, now you ready to, you know, to go through a real ordeal, because you can be knocked out of work and you won't work again. But we're going to do our best. We'll take hand in hand, and you and I together will put down this terrible plague of blacklisting in Hollywood and New York.
John Henry was lucky to have found Louis Nizer, but Nizer was lucky too. Here was a case that could set an important historic precedent, and John Henry Falk was particularly qualified to bring it to court. Nizer said as much in his book, The Jury Returns. He wrote, "If we had to create a plaintiff to test the false charge of communism, we could not have imagined a better one than this Texan who derived a Southern drawl honestly from a lifetime spent in Austin, and who garnished his lively personableness with scholarly attainments." Johnny was bright, educated, talented, but he was nonetheless a political innocent. He truly believed what was right and fair was bound to triumph if you just stuck to it. So, John Henry Falk stuck to it.
You had to know they'd fight back, that they would do everything they could to discredit you. Why did you file that suit?
Because, Bill, I regarded it as an opportunity. An opportunity in this sense. Does a private group of vigilantes, or indeed a government group, have the right to deprive a citizen of his livelihood and his good reputation without confronting him with specific charges and bringing allegations against him through due process of law? I hadn't had due process of law. I was making it. That's the reason I never felt sorry for myself. I didn't have enough money. See, I didn't understand this business, and you have to have a retainer. But Mr. Nizer said, I'm going to take this at a minimal retainer. And then he named the sum. Well, that was about $7,000 more than I had. I was a very improvident person. I hadn't saved money well at all. And so I was telling old Ed Murrah about it the next day at lunch. We had lunch together because he was just tickled to death. He thought this was going to be the great trial of all time, and Nizer was going to take it. And I said, well, and I hate to go in and tell Nizer he's got a total pauper on his hands, although I'm making money each week. I haven't got that kind of money saved up to lay on him. And so, bless goodness, Ed Murrah says, you tell Mr. Nizer, don't you say anything to him. Just tell him that $7,500, it was just $2,500 I had. And he said, the other $7,500 will be in his office in the next week or so from me. And so when I said, oh, no, Ed, I didn't know it. I didn't know he was going to do that. No, I can't let you do that. He said, I'm not doing this for you. Johnny, if you needed $25 and I happened to have it, I would maybe lend it to you, although I don't make it a practice to lend money easily. But, honey, I'm investing this in America, not in you.
So Murrah came to your defense with money.
He got the check, paid Mr. Nizer. And so we were off down the road. And it was headlines in all the papers. I filed $1 million lawsuit. I filed this suit in June of 1956, and all year round. And people would wonder what was keeping me on the vine, that I was supposed to wither and drop off when you challenge a wear, I found. And August the 6th, 1957, I guess it was, Sam Slate, good friend of mine at CBS and my immediate superior there, called me, and you've been fired. They're letting you out. He says they're not letting you out for any excusable reason. They said your ratings weren't what they'd like for them to be, but they're really, Arthur Godfrey's going to take over. He had 4 different reasons that they were going to let me out, see. Arthur Godfrey was going to take over my time, and the network had a right to preempt my time, and that my ratings had kind of slipped and slided, and they thought I'd do better with less time, and or go look somewhere else for a job, and I'd been too long in that same spot for something of that kind. At any rate, and was kicked out of CBS. But you see, since I was so well known, I was an untouchable. And it was strange as hell, Bill, when I got fired. It's a very strange feeling to be blacklisted. And that was unique to that period, that you weren't supposed to be seen with. Go down to Colby's, which was the eating place there at CBS, or any of the Toots Shores was kind of my headquarters over there on 51st Street, I knew everybody that came in, the habitués. Toots had a table for me and all. And people start leaving you and getting up and having to rush out if you come in. I finally quit doing it because it got embarrassing to see them get up and move away from the bar when I'd sit down in a big circle, big round circle in Toots Shores. And these guys would get up and catch my hand and swing, God bless you, fight them, Johnny. And make sure nobody had seen them. And the number of people, Bill, guys that called me. And this is another decisive factor in me fighting this case. Say, call me 11 o'clock at night. Johnny, I'm calling you. I said, well, look, I'm watching the show. Can I call you right back? No, I'm at a phone booth. I'm calling for a phone booth. Listen, I'm going to ask you, it won't take me for a minute. Just say yes or no. I was at a dinner party tonight. The fellow said that the FBI had plenty of dope on you, and that Roy Cohn is dying to get you into the courtroom, that you were really never from Texas at all, that that's just part of your act, and that, were you ever in Russia, Johnny? I said, no. Have you ever been close to Russia? No, I never have. No closer than England, or no closer than Cairo, Egypt, where I was during the war. Well, yes. But they said that you had taken instructions directly from Moscow. And they said this would be proven at the trial. I got calls like that quite frequently, variations on that call, you see, because fear, honey, had taken over this country, and as Boots said, it wouldn't hurt. It wasn't going to hurt us, but it was going to cause us to hurt ourselves. Manipulated, carefully orchestrated fear.
For the next 6 years, John Henry would live in limbo, a celebrity out of work, and eventually a celebrity because he was out of work. Actually, his travail was a tribute to the strength of his cause. He had sued not only Aware Incorporated, but Vincent Hartnett, the organization's leading spokesman, and Aware's backer, Lawrence A. Johnson. These people used a double whammy. On one hand, they put pressure on anyone who might think of hiring the troublesome Mr. Falk. On the other hand, they had their lawyers use every trick in the book to keep the case from actually coming to trial.
I was getting hungry, running out of money. I mean, I was out the bottom of the barrel. And I hated to leave New York in defeat. I didn't know when the case was coming to trial because Mr. Cohn was very able at postponing it. He was around on the round-the-world trip one time and something else another time. And he had friends in the judiciary that he could work these things with. And it was frustrating the mischief out of my attorneys. You remember Gary Moore? He used to be
talk show host.
Yes, and a terribly good guy. He was a sweet liberal Republican that just stood by me the whole time. He was a witness in my thing, and he said blacklisting, a blacklisted person was like somebody that was in a closet, a dark closet, and blindfolded with 6 guys hitting him with clubs. He never knew where the licks were coming from, which direction they were coming from. He was just there, the victim of them. And that best describes a blacklist. See, you never knew. You never knew. At a dinner party, for instance, you never knew whether you were being offensive or being a hero to them, depending on which way they saw it.
So what happened when you went out to find another job?
Well, it's strange because they never told you. Look, you're blacklisted, you're hotter and fire, and we can't touch you. Never tell you. I'll tell you what, I had a friend that was pulling like a mischief for me. So they fixed the lights, you know how they did. When they're adjusting the lights and they don't have a star there, they have some walk-on come in and do it. Damn, I went down there all excited. Well, we're going to make $20 that night. And that was good money back in those days. I mean, you know, it's back in the 50s. And he met me at the door, Mert did, and said, Johnny, I'm sorry. We got a call from the advertising agency this morning that you're not supposed to come on the set.
During this period when you were just hanging on, what was the lowest moment?
It's hard to say, Bill, because I had some very low moments. Let me make that clear. I would be sitting down here in Travis County, Texas, in Austin, Texas, looking at network television and see one of these guys that had run with me, say, just chopping in the tall cotton, still going to town, like Orson Bean, you know. His career just continued to soar because he resigned from the slate and cleansed himself in the eyes of the Lord and became a very successful and deservedly so, a very able comedian. I'd see that and realize, did I do the smart thing? Because I didn't like being broke. I didn't like having to borrow money from people.
Down here in Austin, where he had friends and family and could scrape out part of a living with the talents the networks were afraid to let him use, John Henry started a struggling advertising agency, got some local speaking engagements, and waited for the trial. Finally, April 16th, 1962, it began. In a small courtroom in New York City, Judge Abraham N. Geller presiding.
The case lasted 3 months, and it is beautifully constructed. Nizer very brilliantly charged him with a conspiracy to libel me. because I had opposed their racketeering habits. And that reads beautifully in the newspaper because I'm fighting racketeers, see? And they had never been charged with that before. They'd only been charged with being very patriotic gentlemen. They were fear peddlers. And under the cross-examination of Mr. Nizer, that comes through pretty clearly, see, with the jury. So Nizer asks for $2 million, gets carried away in his summation, and asks for $2 million. So we go to have dinner, and jury has gone to consider the verdict. And I said, Lou, you poured it on. Hey, you had me. I'd have voted for me, too. You were really pouring the juice to them. But $2 million, Lou, they might both think this is a pretty, that actually I am doing it for money. He said, no, here comes a runner from the court and says, y'all, the judge says to come back in. The jury's returning to the courtroom. We go tearing back up into the courtroom and sit down, and the jury files in, and the judge said, have you reached, his name was Judge Geller, Abraham Geller, a man of great justice, a credit to the American judiciary. That's Mr. Falk, who did well in his hand. At any rate, Judge Geller said, have you reached a decision? And the jury said, no, we have a question we want to ask. Can we give more than $2 million? Honest to goodness. And old sweet Louis Nizer, he sat there like somebody caught him between the eyes with a ball-peen hammer. He made a lot of mistakes in his legal career, but asking for too little never had been one of them. And they went out, 30 minutes later, came back with $3.5 million judgment.
How much of that $3.5 million did you finally get?
Well, the appeals court cut it down to $500,000, said that it was a obscene sum of money. It was the first real big, see, it was a record-setting verdict at the time, and said they cut it down to $500,000. I could either retry the case or take the $500,000. But we never did get that because the defendant, Mr. Johnson of Syracuse, New York, big head of a bunch of supermarkets up there, who had been one of the economic fists that could come down and lay it on the big advertising agencies and the networks.
And he was a backer of Aware?
Yes, oh yes, and a member of Aware.
And what happened?
He died the night that the jury went out to make its decision.
Court was recessed long enough for Judge Geller to digest the news and make certain the jury didn't hear it. Then Nizer was allowed to proceed. When the record-setting $3.5 million judgment was delivered, the jury members were the only people in the courtroom who didn't know that much of the money belonged to a dead man. And the irony didn't end here. Lawrence Johnson, it turned out, talked a better bankroll than he had. His total estate wasn't worth 10% of the judgment. Now think of it now. The networks, agencies, and sponsors caved in to an emperor who had no clothes. In the end, the full amount John Henry would actually collect was something like $175,000, all of which he owed to his lawyers and to friends who had supported him through the years. Louis Nizer and his associates had worked for a reduced fee and also indulged in the ultimate lawyer's taboo. They loaned their client cash. Still, John Henry Falk's suit against Aware Incorporated, Lawrence Johnson, and Vincent Hartnett is a landmark case for reasons more important than the money involved. John Henry's case didn't end blacklisting, no. The same sort of thing could certainly happen today, but it exposed blacklisting as the mark of the bully and made it unfashionable. This became even more true when John Henry's book about the case, Fear on Trial, was published in 1963 and became a big seller, which leads to yet another bit of irony. CBS, the corporation that in 1957 fired John Henry Falk for standing up to Aware, turned around in 1975 and made itself a bundle of money with a dramatization of his book. Fear on Trial starred George C. Scott as Louis Nizer and William Devane as John Henry Falk.
Not many people wanted to do what John Henry Falk did.
How am I supposed to live for 5 years?
To go without food, in order to bring this case to trial?
5 years with no job.
In order to stand up to these creatures.
Why me?
Let the word go out from here that this thing has got to stop.
The program was nominated for 5 Emmy Awards and won in the category of script adaptation, but it did little for John Henry's professional career. There were no network job offers, and the closest he got to national television was a running cameo role in a syndicated hit.
Welcome to Charlie Parkinson here, trying to find out what politics is all about from John Henry Falk.
Charlie, I'm still trying to find that out myself.
The one thing that I can't figure out is how so many bad politicians get elected.
Good question. You know, I've always thought that bad politicians are elected by good citizens who don't vote.
Well, why not? Why don't everybody get out there and exercise their French fries?
I guess there are a lot of people in this country that feel that they don't want to be responsible in any way for what's going on up there in Washington, D.C.
The 2-hour TV special helped sales of his book. Fear on Trial is still in print. It speaks to new generations. It's about something genuine in our makeup that is too rarely called upon. About a man who says no when it's far from easy to say no.
There's nothing like the relief of doing what you know is the right thing and understand what is the right thing. This is what the men who founded this republic intended for American citizens to do.
Once the trial was over, John Henry settled permanently in Texas. He would travel, spreading his gospel of constitutional rights wherever he was invited. He became something of a Texas institution and a Texas legend. The man who had triumphed at the microphone found himself very much at home on the stage. Eventually, he would create a one-man show which combined his wonderful talent for storytelling with his political and social philosophy.
I don't know whether you've heard about this place, this Nicaragua. I've heard them. I heard it on TV, you know, seen these fellas talking about it. Never made no difference to me. And down there, it's down in Cuba somewhere. Tootsie, he knows all about it. He's the authority on that. So he's read everything on, and he pointed out, I reckon you've heard of these Sandinistas. You hear Sandinistas? I've heard, and then they make no difference to me either, and they paid no mind to it. But Tootsie did. And you know that he found out that they are Nicaraguans too? Yes! What does that mean to you? I'll tell you what it means, Tootsie, that they've infiltrated their own country. Tootsie says them's the dangerous sort. Well, that makes a lot better point than me saying I think we have a misguided policy in Central America. And I found that people would laugh at things, points that I'd want to make. I could make them a lot better with humor that they'd get across if I used satire and humor than if I tried to preach, you know, and lay the juice to them directly. And by indirection, you see, if you, for instance, I've got this character that I use, Cousin Ed Snodgrass. I got a contract boy and making money off of that land of mine at last. They call it low-yield nuclear waste. A whole truckload of it wouldn't hurt a child. I looked out one morning and a bunch of these protesters was walking up and down the street. Well, the road, and that county road runs by my place, carrying signs. Stop the nuclear threat. I don't believe in violence. Except they are plotting against America. That's what they're doing. Trying to give nuclear war a bad name.
So the humor that you use to make political points comes right out of the life down here, right out of the folks you knew, your own family.
It comes out of the speeches that I've heard made. Do about it. What are we going to do about defense spending? What are we going to do about the deficit? You've got a right to know what we're going to do about it up there in Congress, and I've got an obligation to tell you, and that's what I'm down here for today. And you know, I'm glad I can discuss these issues with you honestly. I love the truth. I learned it a long time ago at the knee of that old mother of mine, right here in this congressional district where I was born. Oh, motherhood, motherhood.
You wrote something that intrigued me once. You said, ours was the first government established that contained an absolute guarantee that the people could think about, speak about, and laugh at the most powerful forces in the land without fear of punishment. Now, I was brought up to think you could speak about and think about and even protest, but you've inserted laugh at. You've made humor an expression of the First Amendment.
Honey, don't you know that's how Uncle Sam was born? Nobody knows that today for some cockeyed reason. Uncle Sam was first called Brother Benjamin. Brother Benjamin was a character that appeared frequently and repeatedly in frontier plays, humor. Josh Billings, Mark Twain were all direct descendants of his that felt this great, great freedom to poke fun and laugh at the most sacred icons.
And of course, these were frontiers people doing it. These were ordinary folks making the jokes.
Yes, and nobody's ever surpassed Mark Twain, who was a genius at doing that, you know. Freedom of speech is guaranteed to everybody. Every American knows he's free to speak his mind, but he's got sense enough not to do it. this kind of satiric speech.
Who's your favorite character of all those you've invented that you borrowed from this society?
That I've created from a one-man show?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've got about 3. I love the mayor. His name is Bill Grumbles. I'm a cousin of the Quarrels and the Fusses. That's a joke Papa used to get that. And people would laugh at that. They don't laugh like they used to. I don't think they understand it. Now, you take the Spanish and say, we're glad you come. Hope all the folks at home are well, and everything's going good, and hope you plan to stay a spell. And they can squeeze all that into one word. Bonjour. He's a favorite because he represents fatuous America for me, and it's full of good, fatuous souls. Another is Miss Fanny Rollins. She's an elderly lady that's like all the elderly ladies whose feet I sat when I was a little boy, listened to their stories of some of whom could remember slavery times, some of whom could remember the Indian times here in Texas, you see. And I came to treasure them. And Miss Fanny Rollins is a lady. She's a capacious lady. Her bosoms go all the way around her backbone, and her arms rest out on them. And she sits and visits about the world. About daylight, and it come up a thunderstorm. And lightning flashing, thunder rolling, you know, and Annie Lee started through the cow lot with 2 buckets of milk. Bless goodness. Lightning struck her right between the eyes. Soured both buckets of that milk. And give her headache. Well, Miss Fanny just goes on and on and on. And I love her, but my favorite one is my final character. His name is Tom Willis in my play. You see, when Buford was about 12 years old, in the first place, my brother, Jim, left him 3 oil fields, which makes Buford one of the richest men in Dobie County. He's very conscious of that. And it also makes him the leading authority on all subjects, particularly religious and political subjects. It does that to a lot of Texas people, I've discovered. And here about 3 weeks ago, Buford came in with a petition, and it was to ask the county commissioners padlocked this porno movie over in Pineville. First I'd heard there was a porno movie. But Buford seemed to know all about it. And it had him exercised. And I said, Buford, well, he handed me a ballpoint pen. He said, you sign right there, Uncle Tom. And I handed him back his ballpoint pen, and I said, Buford, I can't sign that thing. It asks the county commissioners to do something that's unconstitutional. Well, he backed off and looked at me. Eyes looked like a bull yearling looking at a new gate, you know. You mean to say the Constitution talks about porno movies? And I says, no, it don't talk about porno movies. It talks about your right to make a decision about that movie, any you want to, and preach it and persuade all your neighbors to agree with you. And it preaches the right of those that go there to do exactly that. You see, Buford, you can't call the government in to do something just because you're against it. It's contrary to our First Amendment of the Constitution. Well,
Tom Willis is really speaking for Johnny. And that's when Johnny draws the curtain on Pear Orchard, Texas. You remember the voice and you see the vision of Tom Willis. In short, the voice and the vision of John Henry Faulk.
You see, Buford's like all too many people in this country. They don't know a thing in the world about the Constitution that those 55 great men spent all the hot, sweaty summer 200 years ago, or a little more, there in 1787, framing the first of its kind in the history of all mankind. This was America's great gift to the world. It was to allow the people to rule themselves. The people would be the sovereign and the government would be the servant.
We are the ones that created and committed to paper the proposition that we held certain truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And here's the important part, Bill, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. My God, it was like a blowtorch in history. It flared up the whole world. It lit the whole world up. It had never been said before. That it's a natural right of people to rule themselves. You mean God don't appoint a ruler to them? Look, well, that's what the kings have been telling us. And the gentry tells us that we're supposed to keep our place. All of a sudden, you saying Boots Cooper, and you can get up, stand right upside the governor of Texas? Lord have mercy.
John Henry Faulk died on the 9th of April, 1990. Bill Moyers and I lost a good friend. Texas lost an original, a native son, and America lost a patriot. I'm Stud Sterkel.
Funding for this program was provided by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, a catalyst for change. J.R. Parton, the Bernard and Audrey Rappaport Foundation, the Rockwell Fund, Incorporated, the Samuel Rubin Foundation, and others.